Welcome to Unwrap Reality, where we narrate stories on things that happen in real life.
What do you do when the two people you trust most in this world betray you, and then act like you're the problem? This isn't just a story about heartbreak, it's about power, patience, and making sure they'll never forget what they did. It started with a lie, a small one, or so I thought. My husband, Daniel, was always busy. He worked long hours at his firm, and I told myself that was why he seemed distant. But there were signs I ignored, late-night texts he quickly deleted, missed anniversaries brushed off as bad timing, and an odd tension whenever my sister, Claire, came over. At first, I chalked it up to stress. After all, we'd been married for 7 years, and Claire had been my confidant since childhood. How could I have known they were planning to rip apart everything I held dear? Then came the day I found out, the moment that changed everything. It wasn't some dramatic confrontation or a tearful confession. No, it was colder than that. A single text message on Daniel's phone, sent carelessly while he thought I was asleep. The words hit me like a punch to the gut, "Can't wait to start our new life together. She doesn't suspect a thing." And just like that, my world crumbled. What made it worse? They didn't even try to explain themselves. Instead, they froze me out, no calls, no apologies, nothing. Just silence. But here's the thing about silence, it gives you time to think. And let me tell you, I thought about everything. When I look back now, it's hard not to laugh, at least a little, at how naive I was. Before the betrayal, I saw my life as something close to perfect. Daniel was charming, successful, and, I believed, devoted. Claire, my younger sister, was my rock. We shared secrets, dreams, and inside jokes that only siblings can truly understand. Together, they formed the foundation of my happiness. Or so I thought. The discovery of their affair wasn't just painful, it was humiliating. They didn't even have the decency to break it to me themselves. Instead, I stumbled upon the truth in the cruelest way possible, through careless words on a screen. That text message from Daniel to Claire wasn't just a declaration of love, it was a death sentence for any trust I'd ever had in either of them. But what hurt the most wasn't the cheating itself, it was the aftermath. When confronted, they didn't apologize or beg for forgiveness. No, they turned the tables on me. Suddenly, I was the villain. According to them, I was too clingy, too emotional, too blind to see how unhappy Daniel had been. And Claire? She claimed she couldn't help falling for him. As if that excused everything. In those early days after the betrayal, I felt like I'd been erased. Friends we'd shared stopped calling. Family gatherings became awkward silences where no one dared mention their names, or mine. It was as though they'd rewritten history, painting themselves as victims while casting me aside. But here's the thing about being written off, it gives you clarity. With every insult, every cold shoulder, every whispered rumor, I realized something important, they underestimated me. Big mistake. Because while they moved on with their shiny new life together, I began planning mine. Only mine would come with a side of justice. The betrayal didn't just break my heart, it shattered the very foundation of who I was. For weeks, maybe even months, I couldn't recognize myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked hollow, defeated, like someone who had lost not one but two of the most important people in her life. I tried to hold on to scraps of dignity by telling myself it wasn't my fault. But deep down, doubt crept in. Had I been too trusting? Too complacent? Was I somehow unworthy of loyalty and love? What made it worse was how they treated me after cutting me out. It wasn't just silence, it was cruelty disguised as indifference. Mutual friends started avoiding me because Daniel and Claire fed them lies about how difficult I'd become. At family dinners, Claire barely acknowledged my presence, acting as though she were the injured party. And Daniel? He went so far as to block my number, erasing 7 years of marriage like it meant nothing. Every text I sent, every voicemail I left, went unanswered. They acted like I was the toxic one, the unstable ex-wife clinging to the past. Meanwhile, they flaunted their happiness, posting pictures online, laughing together at events I used to attend. It was a slap in the face, over and over again. But pain has a way of forcing you to grow, or at least that's what I kept telling myself. Slowly, I began to realize something: I wasn't the problem. Their betrayal said more about them than it ever could about me. With each passing day, the anger inside me grew stronger. It wasn't just sadness anymore, it was fuel. Fuel to rebuild myself, piece by broken piece, until I was someone they wouldn't dare cross again. Little did they know, their cruelty would come back to haunt them in ways they couldn't imagine. If there's one thing betrayal teaches you, it's that you can't rely on anyone but yourself. At first, I didn't know where to start. My world had been upended, and the pain was still raw. But I made a promise to myself: I wouldn't let them win. I couldn't. So I began small, tiny steps toward reclaiming my life. I threw myself into work, pouring all my energy into projects I'd once put on hold because family came first. Funny how priorities shift when the people you thought were your family turn out to be anything but. I also started focusing on me, the person I'd neglected, while trying to keep my marriage afloat. I joined a gym, not because I wanted to look better for anyone else, but because I wanted to feel strong again. Physically, mentally, emotionally, I needed to rebuild every part of myself. And then there were the little things: taking weekend trips alone, signing up for cooking classes I'd always been too afraid to try, even redecorating my home to erase any trace of Daniel. Each change felt like shedding another layer of who I used to be, a woman defined by her relationships, and stepping closer to who I was meant to become. But here's the thing about rebuilding: it gives you perspective. As I grew stronger, I started seeing Daniel and Claire for what they really were: cowardly, selfish, and deeply flawed. The more confident I became, the angrier I got thinking about how they'd treated me. They thought they could cast me aside without consequences, as if I'd simply fade away. Oh, how wrong they were. Because with every ounce of strength I gained, I realized something: revenge isn't just about hurting them, it's about proving to yourself that you're worth fighting for. And trust me, I was ready to fight. As I rebuilt myself, something inside me began to shift. The pain was still there, but it no longer consumed me. Instead, it transformed into something sharper, something calculated. I realized that Daniel and Claire weren't invincible. They weren't these untouchable figures living happily ever after while I wallowed in misery. No, they were human. Flawed. And humans make mistakes. That's when I decided to dig deeper, to uncover the cracks beneath their polished facade. It started innocently enough. I'd scroll through social media late at night, not out of jealousy but curiosity. At first, it was just harmless observations: how often they posted, where they went, who they were with. But then I noticed patterns. Daniel, for instance, seemed unusually eager to flaunt his success: a new car, a promotion, expensive vacations. Yet something about it felt off. A little too perfect, a little too desperate. So I dug further. Public records, company reports, even old acquaintances, they all pointed to one thing: Daniel wasn't as successful as he claimed. In fact, he was drowning in debt, using his flashy lifestyle to mask financial mismanagement and questionable dealings at work. And Claire? Oh, she had her own skeletons. While she played the role of the sweet, innocent sister-turned-lover, I discovered whispers of her past, things she'd kept hidden even from me. Rumors of an old scandal involving stolen money from a former employer. Photos linked to wild partying and reckless behavior she swore she'd left behind. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became: they weren't the golden couple they pretended to be. They were fragile, vulnerable, and ripe for exposure. All I needed was a plan, and I had plenty of time to craft the perfect one. With their secrets in hand, I knew it was only a matter of time before I could strike. But revenge isn't just about having ammunition, it's about timing, precision, and making sure your targets don't see it coming. So I played the long game, biding my time while carefully laying the groundwork for what would become their undoing. The key? Making them think I was harmless, a broken woman who'd already moved on. I re-entered their orbit slowly, strategically. First, I reached out to Claire under the guise of reconciliation. I sent her a simple text, "I miss you. Can we talk?" She hesitated at first, likely worried I'd cause a scene, but eventually agreed to meet for coffee. When we sat down together, I played the part perfectly, vulnerable, regretful, and eager to move past everything. I even shed a few tears, fake ones, of course. By the end of our meeting, she actually seemed to believe I'd forgiven her. Daniel was next. Using Claire as an intermediary, I arranged a casual encounter, just a quick hello at a mutual friend's party. I acted polite, almost indifferent, as though I barely cared anymore. It worked like a charm. They both let their guard down, assuming I was no longer a threat. But behind the scenes, I was orchestrating chaos. I began planting seeds of doubt between them, subtly feeding each lie about the other. To Daniel, I hinted that Claire might be reconnecting with an old flame, a lie, but believable enough. To Claire, I suggested Daniel's financial troubles were worse than he let on, and that he might be hiding something big. Neither of them realized they were being manipulated. Instead, they started turning on each other, their once perfect relationship fraying at the edges. Meanwhile, I prepared the final pieces of my plan, the evidence that would bring them crashing down completely. All I had to do now was wait for the right moment to pull the trigger. The moment I'd been waiting for finally arrived, and when it did, I made sure it was unforgettable. Everything had fallen into place, their paranoia was at an all-time high, their relationship was teetering on the edge, and they were too distracted to notice the storm heading straight for them. It was time to strike, not with anger or rage, but with cold, calculated precision. First, I dealt with Daniel. Using the evidence I'd gathered about his financial misdeeds, I sent an anonymous tip to his company's board of directors. Within days, whispers turned into investigations, and soon enough, he was called into a meeting that ended his career in spectacular fashion. He lost his job, his credibility, and most importantly, his sense of control. Watching him scramble to defend himself while everything he'd worked for crumbled around him was almost poetic. But I wasn't done yet. Next, I turned my attention to Claire. Armed with photos and screenshots of her past indiscretions, I leaked the information to her new fiancé, a man she'd conveniently failed to mention anything about her wild phase to. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Her engagement ended in tears and accusations, leaving her humiliated and alone. By the time my plan reached its climax, they were both desperate enough to reach out to me, begging for forgiveness and pleading for help. They swore they'd changed, that they regretted everything. But I didn't care. This wasn't about forgiveness, it was about justice. As they unraveled before my eyes, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, peace. Not because I enjoyed seeing them suffer, but because I knew I'd taken back my power. And now, they will never forget what happens when you cross someone like me. When it was all over, I didn't feel the need to gloat. There was no grand speech, no dramatic confrontation where I revealed myself as the mastermind behind their downfall. I didn't have to. The truth was written all over their faces, panic, regret, and a dawning realization that they'd underestimated me. They tried reaching out one last time, sending frantic messages and leaving voicemails pleading for mercy. But I ignored them. Their words meant nothing now. What mattered was that they finally understood what it felt like to lose everything, to be stripped of pride, security, and control. And I walked away stronger than ever. This experience changed me in ways I never expected. Before, I saw myself as someone who needed others to validate her worth, whether it was through a loving husband or a close-knit family. But now I know better. I learned that strength isn't about holding on, it's about letting go. Letting go of toxic relationships, unrealistic expectations, and the fear of being alone. For the first time in years, I feel truly free, not just from Daniel and Claire, but from the person I used to be. These days, I wake up excited for the future, not because I'm looking for someone to fill the void they left, but because I've realized I don't need anyone to complete me. So here's the lesson I want to leave you with: betrayal can break you, but it can also rebuild you, if you let it. When life hands you betrayal, don't waste your energy trying to fix people who don't deserve saving. Instead, channel that pain into something greater, becoming unstoppable. Because trust me, there's nothing more satisfying than proving to those who hurt you that they'll never break you, and that's exactly what I did. If this story resonates with you, hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever faced betrayal? How did you rise above it? Don't forget to subscribe to Unwrap Reality for more stories about love, loss, and redemption. Until next time, remember, justice is sweet, but freedom is sweeter.